So, hi. Do I start?
You go right ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Sidnee Cox, and I see some friends on our Zoom today. Hi. um, I got involved with this whole issue because of kids in schools. And I know that's Cece, I think that's how you got involved with this in the beginning. I've worked in schools for many years, both as a teacher and then as a volunteer. And I started, I was working in a second grade class, and I was so affected by the Wi-Fi in the class. It was kind of making my hair on my arms kind of stand up, and I could feel it in my head, and the kids were all too antsy. So I made a blocker box, and it really helped. The teacher, it was, I had to stand on a desk and clip this thing to the ceiling. It was lined with aluminum foil. It was over the router in the classroom. And I was really excited about the difference it made. And I was very concerned about the kids in the school. So especially in the classroom. So I went to a city council meeting and I thought, I'll share this. I'll just share it that I did this. And then I met a bunch of people who were also interested in this project or this issue. And that was very exciting. Safe Tech for Santa Rosa. This was in 2019 of December. And oh my goodness, there's a group. And we had meetings, and there were 40 people at these meetings. It was exciting. And then the pandemic happened, and then everything got split. So that was disappointing. But now our group is gaining momentum again. And then in 2023, Sandy Moorer, who ran the EMF Safety Network, had to exit because she became a city council member. So then she needed to hand it over to somebody. So I sort of inherited this, but luckily I inherited a great team of people who are really the heavy lifters in this group. And I'm just sort of name only, but I do my best. But I thank everyone for all the work that you do for EMF Safety Network. And then Cece, when I first met you and started seeing your webinars, I was really excited because here's your boots on the ground twice a month, more than twice a month, doing everything you do. And I thought, what I can do in my limited amount of knowledge and time is support the people who are doing such phenomenal work. And so even though I'm feeling like there's never enough that I can do, I know. But if I can support people who are really out in the forefront, doing everything that they're doing, for instance, what you do with your educational webinars, then I want to do that. And anyone who is doing something phenomenal, and I think what you do is phenomenal. I don't know where you get your energy. I don't know how you keep going, but I just so support that. And everyone, we all do what we can. If we do in little bits, even if we do one little thing a day, or maybe we do one little thing a week, it's better than doing nothing. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I agree, Sidney. None of us ever imagined we'd have to find time to give to this tech safety issue. And we certainly didn't see it coming because we've been all told by industry that all Wi-Fi all the time is the way to go without any balance of information on the risks that it brings. So I'm so grateful. And you actually do so much more than you're giving yourself credit there. You have just carried the ball for your community. You fought against cell towers. You worked in the schools. You've worked at the national level with Odette Wilkins and others, and worked with your federal legislators. So very grateful. And what really touches my heart the most about you is that you take care of an elderly woman who lives near you, and you made sure that even though they put up a 5G small cell right near her home, like right outside her home, that you guys have done your best to try and shield her from that harm. And then the neighbor's cat. So Sidney's neighbor has a cat with one of those tile trackers on the collar, and the cat cannot stand it, and it keeps getting out of it. And so the cat keeps coming to visit Sidney because the cat knows Sidney's a friend and a safe haven next door.
I've actually taken it off a few times. Good news, the neighbor gave up.
Oh,
the
good.
cat no longer has the tracker, and the cat has gotten quite fat.
Oh,
because it's no longer hyperactive.
yeah, no longer agitated by the
It's
radio
a different
frequency.
cat. And
Oh,
that cat and my cat are best buds now.
that's awesome.
So
Okay,
I won that battle.
yay. I am going to hit screen share and I'm going to pull up a set of slides and we'll spend the next hour, hour and a half going through my presentation, and then we'll spend a few minutes answering questions. So we ask that folks stay tuned into what's happening in the presentation, but do drop questions into the chat. And at the end, Sidney will take a look and let us know if there are things that we can help to answer for you. So Sidney, can you give me a nod if you can see my slides now? Okay, great. So Sidney is the co-director of EMF Safety Network and another group called Safe Tech for Santa Rosa, which is her town. So we're so grateful. There are organizations like this popping up all over the country. So when industry rolls into town and says, oh, we're going to put this cell tower up, and if anybody cares, well, that's just the NIMBY, not in my backyard people, but it's simply not true. There are people all over the country who have become educated on this and are working very hard in their communities to move that needle towards safe technology. So I'll give you a little bit of background about how I got involved in this issue. That MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And I also did my undergrad there in communication. And initially, when I was 17 and applying for college, I thought I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. And then I did a co-op assignment on a tech writing platform. And so I got to learn about technical writing, and then we started a master's program, and it just all kind of fell together. But I'm just grateful that this skill set that I have in communication, never imagined this is where I'd be using it, but I'm so grateful I have that skill set to help people quickly get through to the facts, and most importantly, the solutions of how to use today's technology safely. So I was at book group one night, and my girlfriend, Wendy, who's an electrical engineer, tipped us off that there could be biological effects from today's wireless technology. And I had run campaign after campaign for 8 years in my children's school district to get wireless technology in, because our budgets in our small town couldn't afford it. So I heard Wendy at book group, and I just made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, I read something from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine that was telling our school superintendents not to allow wireless into the classroom. And I was like, well, what is this? And so that's sort of how my journey began. And being a tech writer, I'm like, well, is there any science to this? And I was just stunned to go out and do my research and find literally thousands of studies all over the world showing extraordinary biological harm to you and me, and especially children and the elderly and fetuses and pregnant women and anybody with any kind of an existing health condition. This is an added body burden in our poor bodies. Our immune system can only take so much toxic load. So I started sharing my resources with my school committee and our superintendent and our school nurses and our science teachers and anybody who I thought might have an interest in this. And it was not an easy conversation. What I learned later is the industry had already gotten in at the state level as they were pushing this 21st century classroom into our schools. I think ultimately with the goal of having a one-to-one device in the hands of every child. Because from a marketing perspective, they know once you have a child as a consumer, you quite often get to keep them for life. So the earlier they can get kids hooked on something, the better for their bottom line. So I kept sharing the science with my school committee, and ultimately we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms that says, turn off these devices when we're not using them. Otherwise, they sit there and pulse radiation all day long. Turn Wi-Fi on, like the access points and the routers, only when you need it. Don't leave them pulsating this radiation 24/7. And always place the mobile device on a solid surface, and we'll walk you through the legal fine print on where it says in our own devices, keep it away from the body. So that's how our schools became the first in the nation to even hang this sign a decade ago, and they still are not protecting the children. They're waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So I started educating higher authorities, and we have had bills here in Massachusetts for a decade on this. We also have worked on a bill in New Hampshire that actually got passed into law, and we're going to show you that. And then on this journey, I was contacted by a couple in Europe that was putting together simple, quick, easily accessed online training, because they realized they couldn't just go out and fix this problem because nobody knew it existed. So we have worked together over the years to build out this little nonprofit called Wireless Education. And we have a course online that can be taken in about a half an hour for about the cost of a movie ticket. And we'll do sliding scale or bulk rates for schools or municipalities or, you know, your workforce. Anywhere where you start, we can help educate very quickly on this. And then when I worked with my legislators, I went to the State House for an expert panel that had come in. We had Dr. Deborah Davis, who's the founder of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's largest think tank and database on the wireless issue. She's also a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change and one of our nation's top scientists. She brought with her Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, and scientists had approached him, and he went out and talked to a dozen of the world leading experts on this and came back and said, our public radiation limits here in North America are not safe. Canada's Safety Code 6 is not safe. Here in the US, the Federal Communications Commission has guidelines for public radiation exposure, and those are not safe. And we're going to tell you a lot more about that today too. Also at that forum was Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, who's a child psychologist. And she educates all over the world on the impact of having kids in front of screens instead of out in nature or with trusted adults or trusted peers. We're losing our kids to these screens. And she wrote a really good book called The Big Disconnect. And all of that, all of these resources that I'm talking about are available through these links, and we will be sending out my slides in a day or two. And if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, it's not a big scary website. We use, you know, lots of white space to try and make it comfortable for you to join this tech safety conversation and get to the resources that you might find to be useful. So feel free to pop around our website there. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work with the legislation and what we've done in our schools and asked me to co-chair the technology panel for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference down at the National Institutes of Health. And I was so grateful that Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada flew in on his own time and dime. He's retired now, but he still gets out and helps to educate on this. And then we had Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, who is one of the world's leading scientists on this. We had Theodora Scarrato from the Environmental Health Trust, and she taught us what other countries are already doing to protect their citizens. We have industry here, so we don't get a lot of coverage on this, so the public is by and large left in the dark, but other countries are ahead of us on this. And then we had Peter Sullivan join our panel. Now, I found Peter Sullivan through a lecture he was giving online, and he wound up getting very sick from this man-made radiation. Now, Peter Sullivan, can I please ask everybody to mute? Thank you. Peter Sullivan was a fighter pilot for our government many years ago, you know, Top Gun. And Peter wound up getting very, very sick. He was up there with the Earth's natural, really high electromagnetic fields inside of a plane that had radar on the outside of it. This is what this technology is. It came out of our military as radar. And then he's in the cockpit with all the wireless instrumentation in there. And poor Peter, he just got so sick. And when he left the military, he went to Silicon Valley. He was an engineer. So his friends like invented the cell phone, etc. And so he had the best of everything until he started getting sick. And he dropped a lot of weight. His teeth got really brittle. And then his two little boys, when they were coming up through the preschool years, they both became very sick and were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And I was watching this lecture that Peter was giving, and he said, I did what a lot of parents will do. You start learning about the environmental chemicals. And so you clean up the food and the household chemicals, and then you might do the heavy metal detox to pull some of these toxins out of your organs. He said, today, all that is important, but I recommend as a first step, you do the digital detox and at least create a sleep sanctuary at home for 12 hours a night where there's no radiation. And his two sons are now grown men. They both went through college. They're both well established and living a good, healthy life today. And neither one is on the autism spectrum anymore. And I didn't even know that was a possibility, but apparently there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom and it didn't come from dad. It came from somewhere in the environment. So Peter joined our panel at the NIH to talk about technologically what we can be doing to reduce our exposures. And so why I like to share this particular link at the NIH is that we were limited to like 8 or 10 minutes on all of our talks. So if you want a highly credible, quick set of videos to share with people to establish credibility on this issue, that 2018 recording from the National Institutes of Health is pretty powerful. Now, one of the biggest gaps we had when I fell down the rabbit hole on this issue back in 2013 is we could tell that a lot of people were getting sick and they were showing microwave sickness symptoms. And we'll hear this topic referred to by a number of different terms in the alphabet soup. So EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. These are the pulsations that come out from all of our wireless technology, from the routers to the cell towers, to the 5G small cells, to the utility smart meters being mounted on our homes, to all of our wearables, our baby monitors, our gaming devices, our laptops, our tablets, our cell phones, all of it pulsate radio frequency, microwave radiation to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or device or router. So sometimes it's called EMF for electromagnetic field. Sometimes it's called radio frequency or RF or RFR for radio frequency radiation. Sometimes it's called microwave radiation. But our focus today is on all of this pulsation of electromagnetic fields that come out of all of our wireless stuff. So we were so grateful that we had the first large-scale medical conference back in 2019 out in California. And I was honored to be brought in to help organize and to present on state and local policy. And then Elizabeth Kelly did another conference for 2021, and again, brought together world-leading doctors and scientists. And then the pandemic hit just as we were getting ready to do this conference. So we had to completely pivot and learn how to deliver a conference remotely. But the beauty of that is that there were 24.5 continuing medical education credits, and those were valid through training up through July of 2023. Now that the accreditation period has passed, Libby Kelly has taken this entire medical conference and put it online at no charge. So you can go listen to all these lectures. I think there's about 60 lectures and other videos associated with the conference, maybe 18 minutes, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour. You can slot these in on your calendar and just come start learning exactly what this technology is from world-leading scientists, doctors, building biologists, who are professionals who go into the built environment and can do all the testing for mold or for VOCs or formaldehyde, off-gassing, test your water. And then there are those who are additionally certified to do electromagnetic radiation measurement and remediation. So we have so many incredible resources to share with you today that we didn't have a decade ago when I fell down the rabbit hole. So what we need everybody's help with is first, just learn, and then help others learn, because we're not going to get this through mainstream media, and we'll walk you through that debacle a little bit today too. So how did my schools become the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging on the walls of our classrooms? I think it was when they read the legal fine print. So for anybody who's watching with us today, if you have an iPhone, I invite you to take that out right now and go into settings. If you have a Google phone or another Android phone, it's in there somewhere still. All you have to do is look up your make and model and type RF exposure into your search engine, and it will come up. And this is what the legal fine print tells us. I want to give a shout out to our friends at the Environmental Health Trust. They have this webpage where you can go and look at what a lot of this legal fine print is telling us from a variety of devices, not just our phones. The iPad, for example, had in the fine print that this can cause seizures and blackouts and eye strain. And I know of children in 2 neighboring towns who had their first seizures while using a tablet that was radiating. So from an iPhone, in settings, go down just a little bit and hit general. From general, go all the way down to the bottom and hit legal and regulatory. So settings, general, legal and regulatory. And then on the next screen, a little ways down, you see RF exposure. It's the 4th item on that menu. This RF means radio frequency microwave radiation, that they politely call energy, because it is a man-made energy. And in that fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking it in your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket, or you're putting it in your waistband or your yoga pants, or you're sticking it in your back pocket, you are exceeding the Federal Communications Commission's guidelines for public radiation exposure limits. And as we'll see when we talk about the legal action today, the FCC has been sued for ignoring the science on this, and they brought this to market with no biological safety testing. So that's bad enough that it says in there that we tested it at a distance. When you read a little further down, it says to reduce your exposure, basically don't touch something that's radiating. It's common sense once we know, but nobody knows this legal fine print has been in there all along. They say to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option like speakerphone or a headset. I'm going to pause my screen share for just a moment, because everything we've broken, we have solutions for. So instead of putting a traditional headset plugged into your radiating device and running a wire up to your head, what we need to understand is that this radiation amplifies around metal. So if you're putting a wire to carry that radiation, it's going to go, woohoo, we're going to party right on up to the brain now. So for everything we've broken, somebody out there has been so good to create a solution. And one of them for the headsets is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. Sorry, my camera's making me backwards here. But notice there's no metal, it's just rubber tips that go up to your head, because you don't want to grab the ambient radiation on metal. And then it's got these 2 little ferrite beads that cut the radiation, and the wire has a nice, sound control here for muting and volume. And then a nice long cord so you can at least create some distance from yourself if you have to use a headset. Please be very careful with those earbuds. You are putting a microwave radiation transmitter on both sides of your brain, and it's talking to your phone or whatever device you have paired with it, somewhere probably stuck on your body. So this was a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And when I first was learning about this, my mind was just, I'm like, it's invisible. How do we even know if we're being exposed? And so I was so grateful to learn that there are detection meters, kind of like Geiger counters for when we have nuclear disasters. But this is, so that kind of radiation is something called ionizing radiation. It has enough power to knock a molecule off the atom and cause harm through heating and other mechanisms. This kind of radiation is known as non-ionizing, non-thermal, low-level microwave radiation. All that means is it's a different kind, and you don't have to have heat to have harm. So industry for years had spun it up, and they set our FCC limits way up here, that it's fine and legal if you don't exceed this amount. But what the science is showing us is that the radiation harm is happening at hundreds of thousands of times below that, way down here. So how do we even know? Well, thankfully, we can measure. This is a radio frequency, microwave, broadband, radio frequency detection meter. And see how it's nice and green in my home? After I stopped circling my tail for a few months, because I didn't want to know this and I didn't want to believe it. But once I started measuring, I was like, holy smokes, I'm the mom. It's my job to protect my family. So I worked really hard, and everything that was radiating in my house, I found it. And then I learned how to fix it. So right now, the maximum spike of radiation that's coming through my house might be from my neighbor's routers, might be from a couple of utility meters that we have for electric and solar that pulse this radiation all the time. It's on the far side of my house. I'm right now at a 5 on this maximum spike. And the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically, within 3 feet of air, how much radiation. In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less in our sleeping areas, which our homes are. And some people who have become sick by this can still do all right at 100 or less. But in our sleeping areas, we really want to protect our body's ability to cell repair while we sleep. So I'm over here at a 5. I'm going to take my cell phone out of airplane mode. I keep it in airplane mode as a rule because I'm not on the go. Why do I need mobile technology? I can simply forward my cell phone calls to my landline. And I know the industry talked a lot of us out of getting rid of our landline. But for like, hang on, 20 or 30 bucks, I got this phone at Staples. You know, it's got a nice speaker phone. I can still talk and work at the same time on my keyboard, but I replaced all the decked cordless phones in my home because they sit there pulsing this radiation 24/7. So I can forward my cell phone calls to my landline, but I want to show you what happens when I take this out of airplane mode. And I'm not even doing anything. This is just the multiple antennas that come in all of our devices coming online. So we're flashing off the charts at the red extreme on the other end of my meter here. And so I'm going to go back into airplane mode so I don't fry myself anymore. And you see that after a few seconds, it starts to drop off as the radiation dissipates from my living space. So we were at 5. We want to be at 10 or less. And just by turning on my cell phone or taking it out of airplane mode, we went to 2,240,000 microwatts per square meter. 2 million, and we want to be at 10 or less. So the message today is not no technology, it's safe technology, and we know how to get there. We want to reduce our exposures as much as we can. And who knew? You know, we have all stuff on our device, but we don't fully recognize that it's a separate service for cellular and data, a separate service for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and locator and hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know any better and got talked into buying a 5G phone, There are separate antennas in that phone for that too. And each one of those services has its own antenna. So each one is always going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, to make that handshake with the nearest cell tower or router in your device. And we don't need that. If you're not using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or locator or hotspot or cellular or data or texting, turn it all off. And then only turn on the one antenna you need for the shortest amount of time possible. Don't use these devices in wireless mode as your playground, right? Learn to reconnect through what we always used to do, Ethernet cables. On the back of your router, there are Ethernet ports, and you can just simply plug in again. And people say, oh my gosh, but my iPhone, I can't plug an Ethernet cable into my iPhone. Well, who knew? You can buy little $30 adapters that plug into the Ethernet cable, that then plug into your device, and then you just have to go in and turn off all those antennas. And I'm going to go back into my screen share again and give you some encouragement for what you can do at the community level. So once I figured out how to hardwire my own house, then I thought, well, gosh, we really need to get this word out to our community. So I went after a grant and became the first in the United States to put a radio frequency detection meter on loan in our library. And the one that we have is the acoustimeter, which is right on par with the Safe and Sound Pro 2, which is this one. This one is a little bit newer and has some additional features, like you can plug it in and leave it running. So you can tell if somebody walks into your home and they've got something radiating, you could say, hey, I'd appreciate it if you just, turn that off right now. So these are about $400, and I went after a grant. It took me 3 tries with my town, 3 grant cycles. I had to go in and educate everybody one by one by one by one. And ultimately, they gave me a $400 grant. I had to educate our library trustees. I wanted 2 meters. I wanted one for our schools and one for our town to be loaned out through the library. And this was also new to our town municipal leaders, that they ultimately gave me funding for one, and we put it on loan in our library. Now, this is an easier conversation to have today than it was back in 2016 when I did this, because with technology replacing so much of what we used to do, people aren't as often reading out of real books that they would check out of the library. So libraries are working on reinventing themselves. One of the things that most have today is a library of things. And my daughter, for example, is still on a wait list to get a power washer from her library. And I got the idea to put this on loan because when the energy industry came through and started taking away our healthy incandescent light bulbs and replacing them with these LEDs and CFL bulbs, those new technologies go on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off in split seconds like this. That can be really hard for a lot of people. I've never felt good under fluorescent lights. So they, as part of their marketing campaign, the energy industry started donating these kilowatt meters to our library. I took one out. The idea was go home and measure how much your incandescent light bulb uses for energy and do the math. And look, you'll save a couple $100 every year if you switch over to our new technology, which was these CFL and LED lights. So I followed that model and said, let's get a radio frequency meter. And so now people around the country are doing this in their community. And we recommend that you get one in this price range, the $400 one, because it will pick up signals that some in the $100 range won't pick up. So you might leave yourself exposed without knowing it. But anything is a step in the right direction. So if your library can do this, that's wonderful. And then we can do education programs around it to let your community know it's there. And people can come to these free webinars every month. Or if you're in the local area, a lot of libraries have brought me in to do a presentation or to show a film and do a Q&A afterwards. If your library is strapped and can maybe only do partial funding or they need help, contact the Environmental Health Trust. They have a small grant fund, and if there's still funding available, If the librarian, it has to be a librarian, contact them, then they may be able to help you get one of these into your library system as well. So again, there are solutions for everything as overwhelming as this electropollution is. And then one of the last bastions of independent reporting is our local cable stations. They love it when citizens approach them and say, hey, I have an idea for a show. Can we work together on this? So here in my town, WACA TV had one of their cameramen come over to my house, and we did a walkthrough of what a lot of common exposures are to this man-made radiation in our homes. We looked at my, keyboard and mouse. I've plugged them back into my computer. I've hardwired my computer to my printer. But one day I was sitting here thinking I had conquered everything, and I just felt like the earth was sucking me down again. I'm like, what is going on? So I pulled out my meter, and sure enough, my printer was radiating again. And my daughter had been home over the weekend and said, hey, Mom, I need to print something. Can I just turn on the Wi-Fi for a minute? And I said, yeah, just make sure you turn it off when you're done. Well, what I didn't know is that little glow light on the front of my printer that tells me when Wi-Fi is on or off, that's not the only antenna in that printer. I looked up online and I found out in the settings there were 2 other wireless antennas in there. So all I had to do was go into my manual and figure it out, and then go into the settings on my printer and turn all of those antennas off. And then I measured again, and it was nice and clean in my space. So I'd been brought in to do a couple of episodes out in Worcester, Massachusetts, with their cable station. And one day the cable manager approached me and said, Cece, I think you just need to have your own program now. So I thought, oh, okay. So twice a month I go into the Worcester Cable Studio and we do this Tech Safe program. And Sidnee, who's our co-host today, has done 1 episode with me, and we're going to do a follow-up episode this month, and we'll send that out to everybody as well. So these are 28-minute episodes with doctors, with scientists, and with citizens who are activists and citizens who become very ill, so they can share their experience in hopes of helping somebody else out there. So please know we try to keep information coming and current. If you have a story you'd like to share, please reach out, and I would be honored to invite you onto my program as well. Okay, so we tell people, don't take our word on any of this. Get to know it for yourself. So if anything that we have investigated and teed up for you today gives you a launch point, we hope you'll take advantage of that. Look and then share. So let's look now at what the science does tell us. First, about the long-term effects. Now, child and adult cancers. So cancer is the long-term endpoint. And for years, the industry would say, well, there's no mechanism of harm to really prove that this is causing cancer or anything else. So let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, 2 decades ago, the Food and Drug Administration commissioned a study with the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. And the National Institute, or the National Toxicology Program, did a study, could cell phones be harmful? And this was back when 2G or 2nd generation or 3G, 3rd generation technology was the top of the game. They found clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. And this shows this causes cancer and DNA damage, among other harms. Damage to the brain, damage to the heart, damage to the thyroid, damage to the adrenals. It just goes on and on. Every time a good study gets done, the corruption starts happening. And so the industry will take it and say, oh, that's just 1 study. You need more than 1 study to prove anything. Well, right as we were doing our study here in the US, in Italy, the Ramazzini Institute was conducting another large-scale study. These, ours was a $30 million. Theirs was like, I don't know, 27 or 28 million too. And they were doing it on cell tower base stations. And guess what? They found the same thing that we found here in the US: cancers, DNA damage, and more. So it doesn't matter where this man-made energy comes from. It's all having the same effect. So we know this is carcinogenic. We know it damages DNA, which is the roadmap to grow proper anything from a human to a plant, to a pollinator, the birds, the bees, the trees, all of it, every biome is impacted by this radiation. And for me, when I started reading the actual science, it was these infertility studies that got me on my feet. They had taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating. It changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused programmed cell death or apoptosis. It was killing the sperm in just 4 hours of exposure to the radiating antennas of a laptop. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. We had just sent our oldest daughter off to college with her MacBook, which she uses right on top of her reproductive organs. And my youngest daughter had just gone into high school, so we gave her a laptop for Christmas, thinking we were going to give her a leg up. So that was the day that I found my voice and started raising my hand with my schools going, guys, I think we got a major problem here. And now we have more and more studies coming out, not just on the sperm, but women's reproduction too. Kaiser Permanente put out a really solid study showing that women using wireless technology are having higher miscarriage rate. So it does a number on all of our reproductive systems. Now, neurotoxicity, many of you will know that even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression. We were seeing suicidal ideation like never before, even among children. And then, ADD, ADHD, these attention deficit disorders and hyperactivity. Dr. Hugh Taylor heads up the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School, and he's done some of the rodent studies because it's unethical to do these studies on humans. He radiated those pregnant mice with cell phone radiation for a certain number of hours a day. And when the pups were born, they started emitting behavior much like a child with ADD, ADHD, bouncing off the walls of the cage, not a care in the world, just go, go. And then Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she sees huge connections between what happens with the families in her care and what we know takes place when you expose the brain and other organs to this man-made radiation. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist. Dr. Martin Pall has culled the information on Alzheimer's, and where we used to start seeing Alzheimer's in people in their 80s and 90s, now it's in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, and even in rare cases in some people in their 20s. So we cannot continue to pollute the environment of the brain and anticipate that the brain is going to behave as it once did before we had all these environmental exposures. So we're very grateful when groups that are better known in the mainstream start taking this issue on. Environmental Working Group is one of those groups. And as a mom, I learned about their work because every year they put out 2 lists around pesticides in our foods. One is the Clean 15 and one is the Dirty Dozen, the ones you should really try and avoid or buy them organically if you can. So Environmental Working Group now has a PhD on staff who works on the wireless issue. They've gotten funding for that. And they've begun to put out fact sheets. This one is protecting kids from wireless in both schools and at home. And here's a good one on the neurotoxicity. So they do a quick overview of what the issue is, and then they list the science. So we're very grateful for their efforts. And we must understand that children are not just little adults. They're still under construction. And children are especially vulnerable to this microwave radiation because their central nervous system, their immune system, the DNA can be damaged, and their skulls are thinner than yours and mine, and their brain has a higher water content. And just like your microwave oven, that operates with vibrating the water molecules using microwave radiation. So Thank you to Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues. They've done some of the modeling on this. So these heads are turned sideways in the model. The little yellow dot is the ear. So when you put a cell phone up to an adult ear, that is microwaving you about a third of the way into your brain. On a 10-year-old child, it's going about 3/4 of the way into the brain. And on a 5-year-old child, it's penetrating that child's almost entire brain. So we have got to step up on this issue on our already overflowing, crazy busy plates and start protecting our kids. So that's the long-term effects. And now we're going to talk about the short term, what a lot of people are experiencing today and have just never been taught to look at these exposures and see, could this be why we're having all these symptoms? Please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act has long since recognized electromagnetic sensitivities, but there's so much industry capture going on at the federal level that they've never taken proactive measures to help you and I to learn this. But they do recognize it for, environmental exposures in the workplace and stuff. So insomnia is huge. A lot of people just don't sleep right anymore. And, kids and teenagers, sleep is what they always did best. So when you hear that a child is not sleeping, this is one area you might be able to fix tonight by creating a sleep sanctuary. So the industry I mentioned for years had spun it that there's, no mechanisms of harm identified. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Well, now we know cancers. Now we know DNA damage. Now we know infertility. Now we know neurotoxicity. And what we know about insomnia is that we are beings of light. Our circadian rhythm operates off of light and dark, and every organ does a different thing on that 24-hour clock. Well, in the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland in the brain is meant to release melatonin. And I'm not a doctor or a scientist, so that's about as sciencey as I'll get on that. But melatonin goes in and regulates our sleep cycle, but it also helps to escort everyday cell repair and regeneration toxins out of the body through the bloodstream. What Dr. Palpatcher and other scientists have taught us is that when we leave this man-made radiation pulsating all day, all night, even though it looks dark to you and I, the brain sees this as a light energy form, and it's over there going do, and it's going to get dark so I can release that melatonin. So if we don't shut these things off, or at least disable the radiating antennas, the brain thinks the lights are on and it's not giving us the melatonin that we need to do important tasks to keep ourselves healthy. So insomnia is big. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines that your doctors can't figure out, nosebleeds, even ear bleeds, chronic fatigue. Well, we now know a couple of mechanisms of harm on that too. So there's something called the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, it sounds like that candy Rolo. And those are those stacks of chocolate caramels, right? Well, our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen to all of our systems and organs. What we see under a microscope, thanks to Dr. Magda Havas and others, is that when you expose our red blood cells to these microwaves, it not only changes the shape of these smooth, oval, or round red blood cells, it makes them start looking like bottle caps. So it's damaging the cell. And then because this is an electromagnetic field, it's causing them to magnetize or to glom together. So now you've got this whole stack of stuck blood cells that are trying to bring oxygen throughout your system, but they can't get there properly. So we know that this rouleau effect is having a big impact on why so many people are having these issues. Pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities. So who knew? Sidnee knew because she was getting feedback from her body in her classroom that something wasn't right. We have little antennas in the surface of our skin that help us to navigate through our world. They tell us if there's a threat in the environment, or if it's too hot, or if it's too cold, so we can mitigate and fix whatever's going on with these environmental exposures. So some people talk about getting the hot ear from having that cell phone up to their head. Some people get tingling or rashes or flushing, or start getting nerve damage where they carry their devices. We are bioelectrical chemical beings. We have our own symbiotic relationship with the earth. So every living thing is meant to be connected to the earth because it gives us electrons that pulsate at us 7.83 times a second. That's something that a scientist named Schumann figured out. So we have Schumann's resonance. This is how we resonate with the earth, and the earth resonates with us. 7.83 times, so round it up, 8 times a second. That's what we're calibrated for. So what are we doing with digital technology? In the megahertz range, instead of 8 times a second, megahertz means 1 million times per second. We're getting jackhammered with microwaves. Now we're up there in the gigahertz range too. 1 billion times per second. We're getting walloped with these spiked erratic pulsations of microwaves. And we wonder why our poor bodies and our pollinators and our trees, why we can't keep up with this. So our nice, beautiful, big electrical organs like our heart or our lungs or our brain get overpowered by this man-made pulsation of energy. So for the heart, people talk about getting these palpitations, heart arrhythmias, chest pains, pressure like someone's sitting on your chest, difficulty breathing, blood pressure that goes too high or too low, depending on your own body's unique proclivity. So then there's the cognitive impairment. People just can't think right. They can't hold a thought. And that naturally happens. There's some decline as we age, but we are seeing so much more than we ever had before. And then this anger and behavior issues and anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation. One of the things that broke my heart the most at that EMF medical conference was hearing multiple doctors say, if we don't get ahead of this and stop radiating our societies, we can very well expect to see many more of these behavior and anger outbursts like these mass shootings that we've been seeing grow year over year if we don't stop radiating ourselves. And again, all of this is backed up in the scientific literature, and it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on our planet that is adversely impacted by these man-made radio frequency emissions. So if you go to this link, you'll find a lot of really good stuff on what's going on with the environment. And our friends at the Environmental Health Trust recently launched a new website. It's beautiful. It's called Wildlife, Wireless, and the Environment. And you can go look at their website and perhaps participate in action items that they have going on too. But just to give you a quick overview of what this is doing. So the pollinators and the birds, they have a symbiotic relationship with the earth, right? They use that earth's magnetic field to navigate with. They have, maybe magnetite in their beaks or their brains that help them to synchronize their navigation systems. And when they get buried in this layer of electrosmog, it dysregulates their navigation systems, which is one big problem why these poor critters can't find their way back to their hives or their nests. And then another terrible factor is that we're moving into these 5G millimeter wave ranges that are, very powerful, packing a huge wallop of energy, but with this spiked irregular emission that their poor little bodies, they can't absorb it and regulate it. It just takes them out. When they were doing 5G testing at The Hague in the Netherlands, literally birds started dropping out of the sky, either stunned or dead. We have similar reports on cruise ships where they've got these powerful antennas on the top that attract the birds, and then they start circling. Before you know it, they're dropping down on the decks of the cruise ship. So we are really, really harming every living cell on our planet. And then for those concerned with climate change, there was a Greenpeace analyst a dozen years ago who looked at the data and said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. That was 12 years ago, and look how much more we've been pushed into all over our communities and inside our own homes and offices. And then Katie Singer is a journalist who follows what goes on cradle to grave with all of our devices. Who knew, but every single one of our devices has dozens of minerals that have to be extracted from the earth under human conditions that are atrocious down in the Congo and elsewhere. So if we truly understood the cradle to grave life cycle, we would never just go buy the new shiny object that they're pushing at us. We would use every single thing we purchase to its full and useful life, and then make sure it gets immediately recycled so that those minerals can be reused instead of doing all the harm that we're doing. The data warehouses, the networks, our personal devices, all of these are consuming energy all the time. Streaming consumes a huge amount of energy. So don't stream wirelessly, download stuff to your devices and just cast it up to your TV and watch it that way, or on your device. You know, the smaller the screen, the harder it is on our eyes. And we now have an epidemic of myopia, which is changing the shape of our eyeballs because we're meant to be looking out beyond infinity. And that's what keeps our eyeballs shaped properly. And when we spend all our time in the shallows of a screen, we now have an epidemic of myopia. So every time we send and receive and charge and recharge and recharge and recharge, we are consuming energy. And all those apps in the background are always back there doing updates. So if you're not really using all those apps, just get rid of them. So little hacks that we can all do today to reduce our carbon footprint and reduce our exposures to microwave radiation. So when I fell down this rabbit hole a decade ago, I kept thinking, if this is as bad as little me can figure out just by reading the science, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this, right? And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came up with this incredible free 59-page report online called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And I had never really been involved politically or otherwise. I was just a mom and a tech writer, just going about my business happily. So this was all really new to me. But when I read this Captured Agency report, I went, oh, this was my missing puzzle piece. See how they put a revolving door on the cover of this Harvard report? That's what has become of our federal agencies. There are still some good people up there in DC, but by and large, most of our federal agencies are now captured by industry, and they are promoting their priorities, not ours, with public health and safety. So this showed that industry executives have now become the leaders of our federal agencies. So I was like, oh, so there is nobody coming to the rescue. There is no cavalry coming. It comes down to you and I to learn about this and then pluck up the courage to do something for ourselves and our loved ones. And then once you do that, you start looking and going, holy smokes, look at all these cell towers that have encroached so close to our homes. Or why did we put a wireless access point on every ceiling, every classroom in our schools? So we have resources to share with you to fix all of this. But that Captured Agency sure opened my eyes. And then some years later, ProPublica put out an article saying the same thing, how the FCC shields these industries from safety concerns. And then that $30 million study that was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration to the National Toxicology Program that determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. That should have triggered public policy to protect you and I, but it didn't. The folks 20 years ago who started doing all the science and research on this are long since retired, or bless them, some of them have passed away. Today, the gentleman who's in charge of the radiation area at the Food and Drug Administration is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. When you look into Jeffrey Shuren's background, you find that he is married to a woman who is a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry and other big industries. So he should have been nowhere near this study. And yet he didn't recuse himself. Instead, he went over to his friends at the FCC and said, we don't really believe that study. Let's keep doing what we've been doing. So sadly, these conflicts of interest go all the way up to the World Health Organization. In 2011, they did a first look into radio frequency electromagnetic fields and determined this is a group 2B possible human carcinogen. There's 5 categories. This was right in the middle. What was missing at the time were the animal studies. And now that we have the rodent studies done that show clear evidence of tumors and DNA damage, this should be promoted to a group 1 known human carcinogen. But industry influence is already eating away at the WHO. And they actually reopened their investigation, and it's ongoing right now, but it looks like it's gotten stacked with industry people instead of the qualified doctors and scientists who should be forming public policy. So again, no cavalry coming. We have got to address this at the local level and push it up from there. So that's all the bad news, you guys. And it's pretty bleak, because if we don't find the courage to do something, we are bioelectrical beings and we're being overpowered. So nobody's coming to fix this for us except for you and I. But there's so many good initiatives. So let's talk about what you can do first. Fix what's radiating in your own space and develop new habits. Do the mind shift to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And this is what we did in my home. On the back of our router, there's Ethernet ports. I went and dug around in my basement. I had a whole box of Ethernet cables down there. So we just took one long one and ran it to a switch. So think of this as like an extension box for electronics. It just has a bunch of different ports. Mine has 5. In a classroom, you can get one with 30, however big you need it. And then you just get individual Ethernet cables for every one of the devices you want to hardwire. So I showed you earlier that once you start hardwiring your devices, you just plug the Ethernet cable into an adapter and then plug the other end into your device, right? And then you go into the device and you find all the antennas and you turn them off. You forward your cell phone calls to a landline. I called up Verizon the other day and said, how much is it to get a landline back? And if you don't already have it with your triple play, you might already be paying for it if you're not using it for phone, cable, and internet. You may be covered. You just need to plug it back in. They say the service is only about $20 a month. So again, it's a right to know and a right to choose. So look for these simple, not terribly expensive solutions to hardwire your technology. So the first step is to get the cables in place. The second step is to go in and to turn off the antennas and everything that's radiating. And in my home, after I hardwired, I measured that router down in my utility closet, and it was pulsating away. And I went, uh-oh. So I called up my internet service provider and said, hey, I'm choosing hardwired technology. Not only is it safer, but once you're cabled, man, you get a screaming fast signal. It's far more reliable than just buckshotting your signal out into the air. And then your data and your privacy are much better protected going through a cable rather than just buckshot through the air, where somebody with $100 app out at the curb could be grabbing your data and learning things about you that you might not want to share. So the service rep that I was on the phone with said, oh, just sit down at your computer. And I went, really? And they said, yeah, I'll walk you through how to get into your account. And then he did, and he showed me where wireless settings were on my online account. And I just had to go into wireless settings, and I saw a 2.4 gigahertz antenna for that router. And then I saw a 5 gigahertz antenna for that router. And I just went off, apply. And I got a message saying, you're cutting everybody's Wi-Fi off, right? And I said, yes, thank you. And then I waited a minute or two and I went down to my utility closet and I pulled out my radiation detection meter and I measured that router and literally radio silence. So that's how I got to being just at 5 on my radio frequency detection meter when most homes are off the charts today. So hardwire, turn off the antennas and measure. Because like with my printer, I didn't know there were multiple antennas in there. That one light on the front of the plate on the front of my printer, it only accounted for one antenna. So if that was off, I thought I was fine, but I was getting radiated and I could feel it. So measure. If you can get your library to get a meter, that's great. If you're in a position to just go buy your own, that Safe and Sound Pro 2 is highly recommended. And there are others in the $200 range that a lot of people with electrical sensitivities use those too. So just know there's good meters out there. Safe Living Technologies is a good company. They're very accredited, and all their devices are calibrated, and they were the ones who were working with us with that medical conference. So we've talked about what we can do personally, and that may be enough for you today, but I want to do a quick rundown of other things that we need to be aware of that may or may not be within our control to stop that radiation. And then when you get my slides, you can do the deep dive or just come back again and just keep learning with us. Some people will learn a little bit, fix a little bit, come back, get inspired to change a little next something, and then come back. So come back as many times as you want. That's why we're here for you. So we can control our own devices for the most part. We have 3 other areas that we need to look at. 1 is the smart meters, 2 is the cell towers, and 3 are these 5G small cell antennas that are being mounted way too close to us. So what are smart meters? When I was a little girl, I'm the youngest of 10 kids. And so we did a lot of hide and seek out in the yard. And sometimes I'd be hiding out in the bushes for quite a while before I got found because there's 10 of us out there. And so I would just sit there and notice that there was like an electrical or gas or water meter sitting there. And I just watched those little dials go round and round and round. So those were good analog mechanical meters that were used by the people who walked our neighborhood once a month and took a reading, and that's how they did our billing to us. Then the digital technology began to advance, and these companies would come to our towns and say, hey, we can save you some money. You won't have to actually pay somebody to walk the neighborhood anymore. You can use these digital meters, and the first phase was there would be a Department of Public Utilities employee who would drive the neighborhood and point a scanner at the digital meter that they'd replaced on our home and get the reading and go house to house and very quickly get the reading. So that saves time and saves the town some money. Sounds like a good idea. But for that one reading a month, that meter was sitting there pulsating 24/7. And when I was testifying before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, I sat there on the inside wall in my dining room where we've got an electric meter and then a solar electric meter mounted. And when I did the math, those things were pulsing radiation into my home 17,000 times a day at my loved ones. So we really got sold a bill of goods when they started telling us these smart meters are the way of the future. They pulse the radiation continuously. And remember how we talked about this radiation magnifies, amplifies around metal? Well, this radiation can hop on the pipes and wires of your home if they're not done properly. And then your whole house carries this signal and becomes this giant radiating antenna. And it's made a lot of people sick. There are report after report of electrical fires and explosions and improper grounding from these smart meters. And then, as we said, you're shooting your data out into the air for anybody to steal. So these smart meters pick up your data here, then use this radiation to carry it to the next house and pick up theirs and carry it and on and on. And so the radiation is growing and aggregating with your data. So the closer you are to this collection station mounted on a pole somewhere, the more radiation is going through your home. And then all this is happening wirelessly. So all that data is airborne, and now hackers can be out there collecting it. They'll see your patterns. They know when you leave the house and when you come home at the end of the day, based on what's going on with your stuff. And so they can back up their truck and take your toys when they know you're not going to be home for a few hours. And then they can sell this data, the utility companies can sell this data to third-party vendors or government agencies who have no business really understanding what's going on in the privacy of your home. So at the medical conference, they said when these smart meters go on, or heaven forbid, a bank of them on multi-unit dwellings like condos and apartments, this is a leading cause of sudden onset of microwave sicknesses. And then it's a huge environmental justice issue. You know, here out in Worcester, Massachusetts, National Grid came in, sold them a bill of goods and said, hey, this is so successful in Massachusetts, we're going to roll it out across the state. And then look, New York, look, Rhode Island, look, Connecticut, you're falling behind. Catch up with Massachusetts. You need a smart grid too. Well, they started these communities that are environmental justice communities, may have a large minority population that maybe doesn't even speak English to know what's going on, maybe working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep a roof over the head and a meal on the table. So they come in, a lot of these toxic industries use this model to go into impoverished areas where people won't know what's going on, and then call it a success and branch out from there. But again, we have wonderful solutions. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer married to a medical doctor wife, and both of them got really sick really fast, and nothing in her training as a medical doctor could figure this out. Ultimately, they realized it was when these smart meters went in on their condominium. So Jeremy has done a great TED Talk. And Dr. Alexia McKnight, who ironically is a radiologist, a large animal veterinary radiologist, she got walloped by a smart meter that went on her home, and she got so cognitively impaired, neurotoxic, that she was out in traffic with her daughter in the car and could not remember if that green light meant stop or go. Something malfunctioned on that smart meter and they had to take it off, and all her symptoms resolved. The headaches, the anxiety, the depression, the cognitive impairment, and more, all resolved. And then when that smart meter was replaced again, she got walloped all over again. So that's how she figured out, was simply because of that malfunction. So these are 2 really good, highly credible TED Talks to share with your towns and your loved ones. But go outside and look, or inside if they put them in your basement or crawl spaces. If there's an FCC ID number on this device somewhere, it means it is pulsating microwaves, and you should be measuring that. So our own stuff, the smart meters, and then the cell towers. So it's critically important to look at the non-industry funded science, because industry at every turn will tell you, oh, it's fine, it's within the FCC radiation exposure limit, so it's fine. Well, we know those are not safe. So you can look at the non-industry funded science. If anything that I've done helps you to get through this quickly, this is my personal research repository called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. And being a tech writer, I just started organizing the information I was finding. So I have a page on cell towers, the science, military experts, doubts, because what are all these doubts that people keep throwing shadow on this with? Cancers, infertility, impact on kids and school. So you're welcome to go in here. And if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and you go to our resources page, you will find a link to all of these pages in my navigation here. So the cell tower studies tell us that there's a death and neurotoxicity curve out in our society. And these are what are called epidemiological societies. That was a new term for me, but epidemiology means what's happening in the population. Some studies are done in the lab, in vivo or in vitro. Is it done in a petri dish or in a living critter? But these are the epidemiological studies. And they show us that there is this curve that starts coming down for neurotoxicity and headaches and nosebleeds and insomnia and nausea and dizziness and all of this, cancers, starts coming down at about 500 meters, which is 1,640 feet. It doesn't actually catch up to the general population statistics for all those illnesses until almost double that. So that 500-meter mark is where it starts to come down. And so we should never, ever have a cell tower or a 5G small cell or any wireless equipment within 500 meters at a minimum. And for highly vulnerable populations of children, fetuses, pregnant women, the elderly, and anybody with an existing health condition, they're saying it should be at least a half a mile away from us. And here, industry is now putting cell towers on our school buildings because the town gets a kickback for it and nobody knows the harm. So that's why we do what we do. So know that these studies are very good and you can access them here. And then for anybody in the United States, there's a website called antennasearch.com, and you can pop in any address and it will return a 3-mile radius of where the cell towers are and where these big macro antennas are. So I did my house and there was, I think, 100 to 200 antennas within a 3-mile radius. When I did the Boston State House, Massachusetts State House on Beacon Hill here, I got a return of 3 miles, 1,520 towers with more than 4,500 of these massive antennas. And these pulsations go out for miles. So our cities have become so electropolluted. This is just, so this is the map that you can get through antennasearch.com, that all these dots and densifications, it's just like, oh, what are we doing? But this is what one neighborhood in Boston looks like. This is Ruskin Road over in Hyde Park. How do those people stand a chance of staying healthy when their bodies will never, ever get a break from this radiation? I understand over in Wuhan, China, which became a smart city right as the pandemic exploded over there, they are turning off these small cells at night. I think they understand that the body must have downtime to cell repair and regenerate. So now we add in the next layer. So 5G or 5th generation technology, our friends in Hawaii, at Hawaii or Safe Tech Hawaii did a nice little, I think 5 or 6 minute video on what is 5G and what isn't. You can see that. The industry is spinning it up that we will have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways, all this really sexy high-tech stuff. But we need to go see why. It's a huge revenue stream. They always have to reinvent to keep their billions flowing. Now go look and see who's buying up the entertainment industry. It's the same parent companies that own the wireless industry. So this is another revenue stream for them, that they own mainstream media too. So we only hear, go for the new, better, greater, without any of the risks explained to us. So 5G doesn't fly all by itself. It's using these teeny tiny little millimeter waves. And those are being promised to us as bringing faster downloads. But in order to carry that quantity of data, these little millimeter waves can't go very far. And they get disrupted by anything in the path, like snowflakes or raindrops or trees. So the industry's solution is to put in cell towers every 2 to 12 houses in our public access way at the curb at bedroom height to be close to people and their devices on the ground. Cell towers right outside of our homes. And it's not like they replace 3G and 4G technology, because those technologies use a longer wavelength, not these teeny tinies, but a longer one that can penetrate walls, floors, ceilings, us, and everything in the path. That's how you can get signal in your house from a cell tower miles away. It's those longer waves. So 5G combines the old and the new. So it's an added layer of microwaves that we're being penetrated with 5G. And, you know, I've gotten reports of industry coming in literally in the cover of darkness and just lopping off the trees so their 5G small cell signals can connect with your 5G devices. And this clear cutting of trees is happening in tandem with cities that are waking up that we need trees. We need to be, and many communities are coming up with projects to plant new trees to create a canopy that will cool our cities in the hot summer months to help prevent, you know, the climate impact that we're into. So we've got, you know, different interests conflicting here. So that could be something that would be very useful to share with your town. If we plan to have trees, we can't have 5G as well. Let's get rid of 5G. We don't need it. As Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut indicated in a congressional hearing, he said to these industry leaders, so please share with us, how much money has industry spent on independent research to prove that this is safe before coming to market? And these industry guys just kind of went hamana, 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 and ultimately were made to say, we don't know of any independent testing that's been done. So Senator Blumenthal says in this little 4-minute clip here from our friends at the Environmental Health Trust, so as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And yes, we are. And yet nobody is doing anything about this up at the federal level. And then Computer World said, 5G is a bad joke. It's not delivering anything faster than what we already had with 4G. So what are we doing here? So 5G is a huge marketing term. Every company is defining it differently as far as frequencies and combinations of frequencies and bandwidths. And it's just more of what we don't actually need. So those are the emissions, and Dr. Magda Habas, who is co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference, she retired from Trent University in Canada, professor emeritus, and recognizes that nobody's tracking the cumulative effect of this. And so she started her global EMF monitoring project, and she asks you and I, as citizens, we can be citizen scientists for a day. She gives us a clipboard sheet, and we go out with a buddy into the community and we start measuring with this. You have to use the same meter, so that's why we like this Safe and Sound Pro 2. Start taking measurements in your community. She calls it her brag project. Can you brag about your community? Or B is for blackout. Are you in these high ranges? Red is danger in these ranges. A is for amber, and G is for green. So this is her brag project. Outdoors, there were some scientists who got together many years ago before we have everything that we have today, but they thought that if we could get to 1,000 micrograms per square meter or less in our public spaces, so long as you're not, you know, hanging out underneath one of these transmitting antennas, you could probably do all right at 1,000 or less outdoors if you have a clean space at home where your body can do its natural cell repair and regeneration at night. So the goal for outdoor exposures is 1,000 or less. Anybody who wants to participate as a citizen scientist can go to globalemf.net and contact them. Our friends at Safe Living Technologies, who make this particular meter that has to be used for the studies, they are very generous and have in the past offered a discount on that meter. I think for me, it saved me about $100 on this $400 meter or somewhere in that vicinity. So if you're tempted to buy a meter and you want to go out and just take measurements, why not help the scientists as well? So feel free to explore that. But what does it look like outside today? So again, we want to be at 1,000 or less. Our friends at New Hampshire for Safe Technology, one of the founders, Lori, went to her local fire department and it was in the green. And then in Keene, New Hampshire, at the time, it was heading up into the yellow. We now know since then that they have put these 5G small cells right inside the neighborhoods in Keene. So we expect that that reading would now be in the red or the blackout. Nashua was already in the red. Concord. Now, these readings were taken during the pandemic where there were not many people with foot traffic or in cars going by. It was pretty quiet up there, and we were already in the red. In Stratham, New Hampshire, they put a cell tower right on the main strip where we were taking our measurements, and that was in the blackout. And then in the North End here in Boston, our North End is where we have these amazing Italian restaurants and bakeries. It's a very highly trafficked tourist area. And this beautiful wrought iron light post is actually cell tower, small cell antennas right there at the curb. And people live right at bedroom height here. And so these are so dangerous. And we're in the blackout right here in Boston because the neighborhood association didn't know before they granted approval. So we need to help everybody get information out to their towns. So Dr. Martin Luther King taught us when we finally start making these important changes in society, it comes through 3 channels. One, the public becomes informed and gets engaged. And that's what we're hoping to inspire with these free webinars every month. Second, it goes through the courts and the guilty are held accountable. And third, public policy finally catches up to start protecting us instead of corporate interests. So there's some really good things happening in all 3 of these areas. And I know we're sharing a lot of information. It's like, as Dr. Lynn Patrick said at the first medical conference, we know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose. So digest little bits and then come back and learn a little bit more. But we want you to know what's there to help you as you pluck up the courage to do something about this issue. So I'll whip through the legal solutions. I mentioned when the head of the FDA's radiation area that commissioned that $30 million study that showed clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. He went over to his friends at the FCC and said, I don't believe that. Let's keep doing what we're doing. When the FCC took that recommendation and filed it into something called the Federal Register, then the lawsuits could happen because the FCC said, we don't need to change our radiation limits. Then the lawsuits started happening. This Environmental Health Trust versus the FCC combined a whole bunch of lawsuits into one. Children's Health Defense was part of that, as were a number of individuals all around the country. They sued and they won. There had been an open file or a docket, 1384, open at the FCC for more than 60 months, for more than 6 years, into which world-leading scientists, doctors, citizens had put the facts in the public record. And the FCC completely ignored it and said, we're sticking with these public radiation limits from the 1990s. So the court said to the FCC, so where's your homework? How did you determine that was okay to do? And they just went, well, the FDA said it was okay. So they, of course, said, well, where's the FDA's homework? And there is none, because not one of our federal agencies has done the investigation into this. So we've got a huge regulatory gap up in Washington, D.C. So the courts ruled, and they found that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious. I didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up, and it means they didn't do their homework. They made it up. And so the courts ordered the FCC to bring public radiation exposure limits in line with the science. And we're now going on 3 years, and they've done nothing. So there is no cavalry coming. We have to address this at the local level, in our own homes and schools, in our own town halls, and start pushing it up from the bottom. So here in Massachusetts, our state level Board of Health Association has come up with a set of legal guidelines on many topics, and they now have 4 pages addressing the potential harm from cell towers. And now out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Verizon came in and put a cell tower right on top of a neighborhood. And the people there got so sick, 17 children and adults had to abandon their homes. Headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, dizziness, skin problems, anxiety, depression, cancers that had gone away had come back. One has sadly died. So for the first time in the United States, and it took years to get this town to pay attention to what was going on, but their Board of Health was ordered by their mayor and their city council to investigate what was happening. And they did. And they talked to the scientists, they talked to the doctors, they talked to the engineers, and came up with this first in the nation cease and desist order to Verizon. And instead of coming to the table, somebody else who owns commercial property in Pittsfield said, hey, we've got property here. You shouldn't be putting that on a neighborhood. We don't care if you move it over here. So there were solutions present, and Verizon would not come to the table. Instead, they went to the court and tried to talk the courts into believing that because the 1996 Telecom Act protects them, that there's nothing they can do to stop them. Well, the Board of Health had done its homework legally and believed that that law from 1996 that talks about you can't sue us for environmental exposures only applies to the point at which applications are done to site the cell tower. Once that goes in, if there is something harming the people or the environment, it is now the jurisdiction of the boards of health. So now there's a big lawsuit out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where the citizens are suing the town to empower their Board of Health to get that injunction removed that Verizon put on that lawsuit. So we hope to see some movement on that in the coming months. And we're so very grateful to the attorneys at Children's Health Defense for defending these families in Pittsfield. So lots is happening all over the world on this. We just don't hear about it because mainstream media is owned by these industries. So that's the legal branch. And then in the policy arena, many states have a whole bunch of bills out there, and I'll just do a quick overview, but the most important one was one that we got passed into law in just 7 months in New Hampshire. Now, mind you, we've had bills in Massachusetts for over 10 years that will get out of the first committee and then they just die by the time the session ends, and then we start at square one again. So it's very frustrating, but we're planting seeds and a lot of people are getting good, credible information about this. But go figure, in New Hampshire, Deb Hodgson is a citizen who got really sick from the wireless in her home and figured it out. Shared this with her state rep, who's an engineer, who'd only been taught you have to have heat to have harm from a radiating antenna. And he started investigating and has this wow moment, like, why don't we know that you don't have to have heat, that non-thermal effects are extraordinarily harmful? So Deb introduced him to me. They drove down to my house in Massachusetts from New Hampshire, and together we taught him what is really going on. And he wrote this amazing bill with very pointed questions. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and all these world-leading insurance companies put exclusions in their policies? They know this is a world-leading risk, and they won't cover for damages. So that leaves our towns on the hook for damages. Why does that legal fine print that we talked about at the beginning of today's program even exist that says, don't touch a radiating device, keep it away from your body? And then why is our corrupt FCC ignoring thousands of peer-reviewed studies? And why don't they account for the non-thermal effects? And why do we allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries do? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? Because as with any toxin, the more dose you get, the greater the risk that you're going to fall apart. And nobody's accounting for putting children in a classroom with 20 or 30 radiating devices, plus a wireless access point, plus the smart board, plus all their individual devices. It's no wonder we're seeing the fallout that we're having today. It would be surprising if we weren't. So in less than a year, in 7 months' time, we got this law passed in New Hampshire, and great thanks to the experts who joined us, to the citizens who joined us. And they came out with this groundbreaking commission report after investigating this for a year. This is in my signature, and it is along with that Pittsfield cease and desist order from their Board of Health. These are the two leading documents in our country today. This is a government that investigated and said wireless is no longer advanced technology. We need to be reserving it only for minimal use on the go and stop putting all the infrastructure so close to people. Get this out of our schools, out of our libraries, label everything in clear, plain view that's radiating, so we're not hanging out and radiating ourselves. So get our federal agencies back onto this. So incredible work is happening. Every time we try to enact their recommendations, the industry gets in there and torpedoes it. So until enough of the public is speaking up to empower our legislators, we are probably not going to see meaningful protective action in policy. But amazing talks by amazing experts that you can access to learn about all of this. And then we tried to enact bills for the setback to get a registry of harm done. So lots that you can be looking at for what's current today. And then you can see bills in other states as well. Our commission bill has advanced out of committee, and we just learned this week that our smart meter bill, to give people the right to opt out of putting those toxic meters on their homes, just get the analog meters back. They've gotten another extension on that bill, so they haven't killed it. That gives us hope, but it could push us up to the end of the session, and then we're going to run out of time again. So, but at least we are still planting seeds with our legislators, and then we as citizens have to start speaking up. And there are many bills in other states you can look at. And like I said, the industry comes in and says, oh, nobody else cares about this, but you know, the NIMBYs, not in my backyard people in your town. Again, misinformation, disinformation that comes right off their lips to all of our towns and legislators. You can go to Americans for Responsible Technology and see there are more than 150 groups, just like our co-host today, Sidnee, is actively involved in 2 groups out in California. And then for the cell towers, there are towns who are taking control of this and changing their zoning code to say, look, we know by law, we can't say you can't have a cell tower in our town, but we have the right to say where it goes. Put them in industrial parks where people aren't sleeping, right? Then next maybe in commercial zones, but not in a residential area. And so you can set your bylaws up to get these setbacks, right? And a lot of towns have done this already, but who would know, right? And then other towns at the municipal level, Burlington, Mass, we educated there, and they put together a committee with members from their health, their zoning, their planning, their select board, which is like their city council. And they came up with a small cell policy that had Verizon withdrawing their 7 small cell applications because they hired a special attorney who understands telecom law, because most of our town attorneys are no match for the industry. So you do need to hire somebody who's an expert in this. And their small cell policy became part of a national example. Couple things they did is, one, they said the law protects us around aesthetics, the federal law. So it can't be some ugly thing that doesn't blend in with the environment. It has to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can't stick a pole in the middle of a sidewalk that a wheelchair can't get around. And then they said 2 really important things. If we grant you this permit, you have to come back every year and recertify that this equipment is still compliant with the current laws. And so we, Burlington as a town, don't have the money to pay an independent consultant to come do that annual recertification. So you, Verizon, and every other interested vendor, you're going to have to pay an annual recertification fee to get an independent consultant. And mind you, they want to put millions of these up everywhere, and they're already well on their way. But because they put this in their local policy, Verizon withdrew their applications. So if your town is not getting up to speed in updating their zoning code, they are sitting ducks. And then the industry put shot clocks on their applications, and that 60 or 90-day shot clock is not enough time to update your zoning code. So the message is, don't wait for one of these applications to show up. Get out there right now and use these toolkits that our friends at American for Responsible Technology have put together for you, with everything you need to get in there and start this conversation. Checklists, sample zoning code, towns that have already done it, what does their zoning code look like? So once Burlington did it here in Massachusetts, citizens went to their towns and other towns started updating their zoning code. So it is happening, but most of our towns are in the dark. But check this out. A grandmother in Easton, Connecticut figured out what 5G was, went to her local boards, and there was a doctor on one of their boards, and he could really vet the science. And so they put a moratorium. We are not allowing 5G in our community until it is proven safe. And they've re-upped that ban a couple of times now. So Stamford, Connecticut brought in experts to do an education forum. And then they said, no, Governor, we're not going to buy into this deal that you and the industry put together to put 5G small cell antennas outside of our citizens' homes. No, thank you. So it can be done, but it takes time and determination and diplomacy, but it's happening all over the world. And that's to help empower you guys. We really got to protect our kids, you guys. Sometimes if you try and come at it straight on, the industry gets in there and torpedoes you. So there was a doctor in Louisiana, Dr. Holly Grow, who is a corneal surgeon, ophthalmologist. She started telling her legislature what it's doing to the children's eyes. She brought in other medical colleagues who specialize in the heart or in lifestyle, and they all banded together. They unanimously passed a law that we need to come up with best practices for digital devices in our schools, unanimously through the House and the Senate. Who's going to say no to a bunch of doctors, right? So we all need to start where we are, educate, and do what we can. The Netherlands and Finland and others are taking tech out of the classrooms. We got sold a bill of goods. It is not advancing the learning process. It's a huge distraction to the teachers trying to convey their knowledge, and the kids are on these devices. New York Times did a series of articles on what Silicon Valley executives are doing, and they are sending their children to schools with no tech, not wired, not wireless, no tech. They know a child does not properly develop in front of a screen. And they're taking it so far as to having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens of any kind around their children. And yet they keep forcing this onto our children. But for every problem, we have solutions. And God bless Doug and Patty Wood at Grassroots Environmental. One of their projects is Americans for Responsible Technology, and they also have Tech Safe Schools. They will send a packet of information to your school administrators so that you can begin opening this conversation locally. We advise, don't go it alone. Start working with everybody around you at the parent or grandparent or guardianship level. Get them educated first. And then as a diplomatic group of concerned parents, start working with your schools and don't back down until you get it fixed. But a great toolkit here that explains the health risks, the legal risks, and most importantly, what schools can do today to reduce that exposure. And then the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has built with experts K through 12 curriculum. So it exists today for no charge. Dr. Alexia McKnight, who's the veterinary radiologist who got so damaged from the smart meter, she and I have already developed professional development training. Here's a 46-minute video of what we did with her children's schools on Professional Development Day. And here's that little course. We can train your entire school, your entire workforce in about a half an hour online. And then Environmental Health Trust has just incredible resources that you can print out and start hanging up, just like the flyer that I do for my monthly webinars. They've got postcards and, brochures for doctors. They've got incredible resources. And then the state of Maryland has become the first public health agency around children to recommend hardwiring our schools. So let that be an inspiration for your state, and see their fact sheet here. There are many, many resources. And then for professionals in the healthcare industry, we now have that EMF medical conference. But look at this, the first textbook for medical school has now come out by Dr. Panagopoulos out of Greece, with colleagues from all over the world contributing chapters on their expertise on this. So we know how to fix everything. And then Dr. Cindy Russell, Dr. Joel Moskowitz have Physicians for Safe Technology, along with other experts that you can send to your healthcare team, because this may come out of left field and it may make them feel safe looking at a physician's website. So know that that's there. And then engineers and physicists, technologists, architects, we've got incredible resources for everybody. And you can drill down into that on your own time. So I mentioned that if you're not a do-it-yourselfer, you can hire a building biologist to consult with you. If there's nobody near you, a lot of them do it. Now they can send you the equipment that you need and have you take measurements and then talk you through what to do from there. This award-winning film, Generation Zapped, 74 minutes. It's available through most of our library streaming services. So download it to your device and cast it onto your TV. Don't sit there radiating yourself while you're watching it. But it's a great way to bring your loved ones together, bring together all the parents of the kids that your kids hang out with, and really start building out your local coalition before you go to the authorities. Bert Wolf on PBS has subsequently done 2 half-hour episodes on this. And then here's that Advocates Toolkit at Americans for Responsible Technology for you to know how to go about this. And if there's no group in your area, they've got in their toolkit how to start a group. And then we have resources for our towns. We're here to help at every turn. The goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable, which the Centers for Disease Control already uses for their ionizing radiation, like X-rays and gamma rays and all of that. All these same principles apply to non-ionizing radiation. You want to reduce your time in these exposures as much as you can. The second prong is to create as much distance as you can. And the third prong is, if you can't get away from it, you better learn how to shield, and do that with a professional like a building biologist, because there's a lot of caveats with shielding. So lots of resources here, but we must remember, when the industry comes in and says, oh, we're at like 0.5% of the FCC's limits, that doesn't protect us. That's still extraordinarily harmful. So we always have to measure against biological effects, not the government limits. And then there's all sorts of wonderful resources for our towns to come into the loop as to why we should be bringing fiber optics to and through the premises, which just means they run it to the building, we pick up with cables. Turn off the antennas and we have future-proof, amazing technology. So next steps, we can't kid ourselves. There is no safe level of man-made radiation. And Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who's now retired, she was at the federal agency at the top of the food chain at the NIEHS. And she said, it's going to take local people pushing it up through the state, through their towns, before we'll see meaningful change at the federal level. We hope that it will happen sooner or later in tandem with the lawsuits that are happening, but we really need to educate. And that's why we do these free webinars every month, so we can help you. If you go to the events page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, the next sessions will be posted. And then start where you are. Bring me in. I would be honored to do a forum with your town. And here's a couple that I've done here that you can share with your towns. But start where you are. You know, what do you do for a living? What do you do for your family? What groups, what civic groups, what professional organizations? They're always looking for speakers, and public speaking is my happy place. So if there's anything that I can do or refer you off to the scientists and doctors, we're all here to help. So please let us know. So at the local level, our town should be forming tech safety committees because tech is here to stay. So let's get ahead of it. They should learn about these smart meters, and always as a first step, make sure that we get opt-outs, because like these water meter companies are coming in now, and they're telling our towns to put a letter out to all your residents and tell them it's mandatory. You have to do this. I got one of those letters and I reached out to our Department of Public Works and said, please show me in the law where this is mandatory. And they have yet to respond. And just these bullying tactics that these industries are using, and our towns don't know any better. So we have to get the education out there, and get our local bylaws up to speed, and don't be afraid to hire a good attorney. Andrew Campanelli is one of them. He used to work for the industry till he figured out the game. And now he switched teams and he represents individuals in court and he represents towns. And for, I think it's $8,500, he can look at your zoning code, identify the gaps. He'll look at your state law, and he knows federal law inside and out. And the industry comes in and says, oh, your hands are tied. And these guys know your hands are not tied. You might have one pinky finger tied, but there's many other things you can be strengthening your local zoning bylaws with. And so hire an attorney who really understands their stuff. So for today, think about what you can do to start noticing your exposures and then start reducing, right? Start with baby steps. We know this is a lot, but every little thing you can do adds up to big wins in the end. Maybe you start by creating that sleep sanctuary so your body can heal at night from the damage. And then make your way back to the Ethernet cables and adapters, and just turn all those antennas off. And for the stuff you carry around with you, keep it in airplane mode as a rule. Your phone calls will go into voicemail. And then only turn on the one antenna in your settings that you need. Leave all the rest of them off until you need it, and then use it for a short amount of time as you can. And then go play around on Environmental Health Trust and look at all these amazing 1-pagers, 2-pagers, postcards. You know, they've got so much to help you get this information out in a very credible, non-threatening way.
Everyone, I'm from your telephone company.
Vicki, can you please mute, hon? We will send you links to Sidnee's websites here when we send my slides out, and you can reach me directly through the Gmail address, or reach out and join us. Sign up at Massachusetts Safe Technology, already on my list. And I'm going to stop the sharing now, and I'll ask Sidnee if there is anything in the chat that we should be addressing.
I'm looking at the chat and I see no questions. So,
Okay.
yeah, and also I just wanted to mention about that Doug Wood from Americans Responsible Technology has sent out thousands of 3-page letters to every single superintendent in California, Illinois, and I think 2 other states. He's going to do it to every single state, but he's asking people who live in these states. I know one's California, I think one's Illinois. I know one's Illinois, and the other couple.
Yeah, I think Michigan.
Michigan, yes.
Yeah.
And just asking us to follow up with a letter saying, please pay attention. And you can print them out. I printed them out. It's just 3 pages. And you can send them yourself to say, oh, you must have gotten this from ART, America's Responsible Technology, Safe Tech Schools. Please pay attention. Or you can even go to the open mic at the local superintendents, when they have school board meetings. I know it's really awkward for a lot of us to speak out at these meetings. You can go to a planning commission meeting and speak during public comment time, or a city council meeting. And you can write it down. You just have to read it. And then after a while, you get more comfortable speaking out and you can speak just off the top of your head. Unfortunately, speaking out in front of public is not my happy place. I'm so glad it's your happy place. But I'm getting more used to it. And I'm realizing that just repetition is really what helps. So thank you.
Yeah, no, Sidnee, thank you so much, because it does. It takes us all way out of our comfort zone, but nobody else is going to fix this. So really, folks, go watch Generation Zap together with your loved ones. Get a dozen people informed on this so that whatever the dates are for your school committee meeting or your planning board meeting or your zoning or your city council, you guys don't have to do it all by yourself. You can have a group of people, and some people are terrified of public speaking. That's okay. Even if the warm bodies just show up or sign into the Zoom, you have to let your town know that it's not just you. That was my hard lesson learned, because I knew I was right and I had all the facts, but I was just one voice and they just swept me under the rug. But when a group of well-informed, polite, professional people show up and have this conversation meaningfully, you can't just drop and run because they've got 5 bazillion other things on their plate. You have to keep showing up and hold them accountable. And Jenny DeMarco is down at Virginians for Safe Technology, and she was our co-host last month. And she said that during the pandemic, their town just rubber stamped these cell towers that were going to come in right at the school. And she's like, what? And so she did up a flyer, and she and her husband stood out in front of the school and handed a flyer to all these parents. And then the parents got informed, and then they showed up and worked with the town, and they killed that cell tower application. That's how it gets done. Nobody is going to take the ball and run with it. So we have to just, if we care that much, we have to make it a priority. So, all right. Does anybody else wish to unmute or raise a hand and ask any questions before we sign off? Because we know it's a lot, but we will send out the video and our slides in the coming days, and just keep revisiting. Come back and join us again and again. And until then, we hope that you will have a tech safe day. Sidnee, thank you so much for co-hosting. I'm just delighted that we're going to do another WCCA program with you and get that out in the next couple of weeks. And that at the end of the month, on Monday, April 29th, from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, which is 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific, we're going to do another one of these webinars. So feel free to come or send other people our way, and we'll do what we can to help them. All right, everybody, have a tech safe day, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.